So here we have the young smoking version of Alan Parsons.
Right.
Terrible indictment here. But this Dark Side of the Moon was on 16 track, is that correct? I mean, by this time?
Yes.
And
we actually went to, as Pepper had gone from 4 to 4 to 4, we did end up on a second generation 16 track. Most of the songs, I think, had bass and drums in stereo on tracks 1 and 2. So there was no real way to get more or less bass or more or less drums in terms of the balance between them. But
do you think that, you know, what I'm interested in this talk is kind of how the recording technology affected the music that was able to be created? Do you think the Dark Side of the Moon could have been made on a 4-track, or did it, you know, did 16-track kind of encourage an album like that to be, or enable?
I think it would have been very tough on 4-track, particularly you know, things like adding dialogue. You know, mind you, that was probably done at the last minute. You know, going 2-track to 2-track, more likely. I really don't remember. As I recall, most of the dialogue and effects were not actually on the multitrack, with the exception of Money, where the loop just that was on the first 4 tracks of the tape. And 4 tracks rather than 2 tracks because it was destined to be released in quadraphonic, in the quad format. So those Money sounds going round, they go around the room rather than just bouncing backwards and forwards as they do on the stereo version. But that was, anybody interested in knowing how that Money loop came about? Yeah.
No.
Okay, next session then. We had to literally assemble each of those sounds separately. We took a bag of cash and dropped it on the wooden floor of Studio 2. That was one of the sounds. Tearing up 100-pound notes. There wasn't really 100 pounds. It was just a piece of paper. That's what it was meant to sound like. One of the sounds was actually a uniselector in a telephone exchange, which just came off the Abbey Road Effects Library, which was just a steel-doored cupboard with quarter-inch tapes in it that everybody had free rein to go and dig out. And each of these 7 sounds, it was a 7 in a bar sequence. Each of these 7 sounds were then recorded onto a half-inch, it was a 1-inch 4-track tape. Then, of course, we had to edit for each sound, and we found that the timing was so crucial. If you actually just let each sound run its own course, the loop was terribly out of time. So we physically took a ruler and measured, you know, whatever it was, 3 7/8 inches for each sound. Buttoned them all together, ran them around the tape machine as a continuous loop using pencils and mic stands to hold the tape taut. And then that was transferred to the master master 16 track, and the band actually played to it as a click track. It wasn't, so I faded it out as they got into the groove. I faded the loop out, and of course during the first verse of the song they drifted miles away from the original loop, not having played in sync with it. But it just so happened in the gap between the first and second verse, they're back in sync again. So that's why you hear that one sequence in between the verse, because they just happened to be in sync with it.